Okay, welcome in everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. Probably going to start this at around 12:05 just to give folks the opportunity to come in and they're coming from another meeting or something. But thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, hello.
We're
Really
so
happy.
glad to have Viscountess Violet with us.
Thrilled to be here. I'm really excited.
I'm most excited to hear about all the Bridgerton references, to be honest.
Oh my gosh, I hope I've got enough of them in there now.
Yes.
Mm.
Some wonderful people joining that I recognize. Hello, Alice. I know Alice is going to be in your book club, right?
Yeah,
Founding
she's on our
member.
committee now,
It's so
which
great.
is great. I know, it's really exciting.
Yeah, and some new faces that I actually don't recognize, which is great. So if you're brand new to us, because we had sent this invite out far and wide, my name's Alex. I'm with St. George's Society. And if you're unfamiliar with St. George's Society of New York, we are a 256-year-old nonprofit. We're the second oldest charity in New York City. And we are basically part charity and part social society. So through the year, we have various different events like these. We've just started doing these virtual fireside chats. We also do things like our British Ball that we just had at the Plaza Hotel last month, that are, black tie events. We have pub quizzes. We have theatrical events. We have bonfire night in November. So we have lots of different things. And then we also are a charity. So most of the funds that we raise at these events go back towards our charitable programs where we raise money for senior citizens that are at risk of homelessness, and then also college students that are in CUNY schools that need a little bit extra financial support finishing their degrees. So, if you're looking to go give back, but also meet people in New York City, this is a really great way to do it. Recently, I've been getting a lot of emails about, oh, I know this, English person. Can they refer me? You actually don't have to have any connection to the UK to join. You can be an Anglophile. You can be like me, that I was just telling Violet, 20th generation Scottish. You can just want to, give back in some way or find a community in New York City. But the membership is really open to everyone, and we have tons of events coming up that we would love to see you at, volunteer opportunities as well that are exclusive to members. Like park cleanups. We do things at churches for people that are experiencing food insecurity. We just did an oyster event where people harvest oysters. So we have so many different things coming up. And yeah. Violet, do you want to say anything before we officially get started and I introduce you? We have about 2 minutes here, a minute or two before we officially
Perfect.
start. Yeah.
No, just thank you so much to Alice for kind of connecting me
Yeah.
with you guys, and really excited to sort of share a little bit more. I guess sort of for context for everyone, I'm going to talk a little bit about yeah, sort of growing up at Beaver, and then kind of go into sharing a bit more about Heritage Explore, which is what I've gone on to create, sort of inspired by my childhood. And it shouldn't be any longer than 20 minutes or so. And then I know that Alex has organized for us to have a sort of time at the end for a Q&A, which is great. So that
Yeah,
sounds
this world is just so new to me. I was just sharing with Violet, I was in the UK in December, and it's so new to an American how you're just driving and then it's just a gorgeous castle on top of a mountain. It's just so part of your culture, and it's just you just can have an afternoon tea at the castle, and it's just not even a
I
big deal to be able to do that. So
I know. I
so
know, we're very
cool.
lucky. But I
Okay,
was just saying to Alex, we don't have the glorious weather that you guys have got in New York right now. We've got
very true. Yes. Very, very
we
gorgeous sun
like it.
coming in. Can't complain after the winter. So,
Yeah, yeah.
yes. Okay, well we still have some people trickling in, but I'm gonna start. So to we had a few more people join. So just really quickly, again, my name is Alex. I'm the Senior Communications and Events Manager with St. George's Society of New York. I've been here for a little bit over 2 years, and it's been an absolute blast. St. George's Society is part social society, part charity. I think I already shared with those of you earlier. We do lots of different events. We have things like virtual fireside chats like today. We had our British Ball. We have tons of different summer events coming up. We have a bunch of different World Cup watch parties all over the city for the England and Scotland games. So long as they stay in the tournament, we're doing group stage watch parties, and then when they're in the knockout stages as well. We have the King's birthday picnic coming up next month to celebrate King Charles. So we have so many different things coming up. And if you want to become a member after this event and you're looking for maybe member exclusive opportunities, you can join. You also, at our events in person, you get things like free drinks, discounts at various bars and restaurants and brands. So please check us out at stgeorgesociety.org afterwards if you are not a member and you still would like to join. And I'm gonna just really quickly introduce Violet and her company. So she is the CEO and founder of HeritageXplore. HeritageXplore is a small team with a clear belief that Britain's independent historic houses deserve to be seen, experienced, and understood in new ways. HeritageXplore works closely with the families and teams who care for these places, building relationships, curating experiences, and opening doors that might otherwise stay closed. And Viscountess Violet Garnock grew up in Belvoir, I hope I'm saying that right, Castle, giving her a rare and genuine understanding of Britain's independent heritage landscape. Before founding HeritageXplore, she built her own marketing agency and co-created the Duchess podcast with her mother, the Duchess of Rutland, later launching Hidden Heritage, her own podcast on Britain's historic houses. HeritageXplore brings these threads together, connecting people more directly with the houses, the stories, and the people who call them home. So let me just spotlight Violet here so y'all can see her very clearly. And yeah, without further ado, take it away, Violet.
Thank you so much, Alex. I might have to borrow that brilliant introduction for other occasions. That was great. Well, thank you so much for having me. Hopefully everyone can see the screen. Alex, I'm guessing you can see the screen. I actually can't see everyone, so I'm just hoping that everyone can see the screen. Maybe just
You're
give me a
great. We can see everything.
tab.
Yes.
Well, thank you so much for having me. Come and sort of share a little bit more with you all about, yeah, my upbringing. It's a real pleasure to be joining you from actually Scotland today. But I was explaining to Alex, I'm between Scotland and London these days. And I've got a short presentation to go along with it. Really, it's just a picture presentation. So I often say, as Alex mentioned, I grew up at Belvoir Castle. And Alex, you didn't by any means get the pronunciation wrong. Beaver means beautiful view in French, and obviously our ancestry heralds from 1066. We came over as the sword bearer to William the Conqueror, and my ancestor Robert de Tordini was given the land that Beaver now sits on in approximately kind of 10, sort of 10 years, a decade later after 1066, essentially. And the first castle was built shortly thereafter. And there was a huge sort of amount of obviously discontent in the local area of Lincolnshire and Leicestershire, which is where Beaver sits. And when Robert looked out and surveyed the view on which that Beaver sort of looks on, even still today, he famously said Belvoir, meaning beautiful view in French. Um, and all of the locals, in kind of rejection of this French man who, had taken sort of siege and control of lovely Lincolnshire and Leicestershire, decided to revolt and named Beaver Beaver. So although it's pronounced, technically speaking, it should be pronounced Belvoir. For the last however many centuries, I'm afraid it's been pronounced beaver, which can have several meanings in several different languages. But Belvoir is unequivocally a more beautiful way to describe it. Um, but so I often say growing up at Beaver Castle is probably the greatest education that I could ever have. And not because it was sort of solely glamorous, although of course there were huge moments of glamour growing up in a beautiful Regency castle as Beaver is. But also because from a very young age, I witnessed firsthand what it actually takes to keep Britain's historic houses alive and kicking in the 21st century. Running an independent estate in the 21st century is not romantic in the way that people often imagine. Behind every beautiful door are impossible insurance premiums, endless restoration projects, staffing challenges, tax pressures, and a constant balancing act between preservation and commercial survival. And when my parents moved into Beaver, and we moved into Beaver in 1999, and as I'm sure lots of you will know, in the UK, very often you only move into a historic house upon the death of the current custodian or incumbent. So unfortunately, my grandfather died in 1999, and my father and mother moved in sort of shortly after. And when my parents moved into Beaver, they inherited not simply, of course, a family home. As I mentioned, we've been there for a very, very, very long time, but also an enormous responsibility. And as children, we were suddenly surrounded by staff and visitors and a world that felt very steeped in tradition, but also one that clearly needed reinvention if it was going to survive into its future. And a kind of quick aside story. You can see me sort of enjoying a bicycle ride here with a gentleman I didn't actually know, but was on the estate, and I think there must have been some activity happening. But my mother was always keen when we were growing up that I really credit my mum with giving us the sort of entrepreneurial spirit, because she always made the fact that we were open to visitors at the castle, which is of course still the case today, and indeed is the case with everything we're doing with Heritage Explore. She always made sure that she encouraged us to go and sort of start businesses. So my first technical business was when I was about 12, selling ice creams at the Beaver Ice Cream Shop to all the wonderful visitors that were coming around. So even as children, I remember really sensing this tension of kind of preservation and the desperate need to kind of reinvent itself. And I vividly remember being taken food shopping when we first moved into Beaver and being told that I was not allowed to buy the expensive apple juice by my mother. And I remember thinking rather naively and saying out loud to my mum, "But mum, we now live in a castle." To which she laughed and said, "Well, darling, I'm afraid it's not quite as you imagined." So that incongruity fascinated me from a very young age, and this understanding that, on the outside and on the outset, of course, there is a huge amount of welfare and huge amount of sort of need to preserve the contents, but actually, there's also a really scary amount of sort of things that need to be maintained and are increasingly difficult to do so. So people often do not realize in many of Britain's most historic houses are privately owned still in the United Kingdom, and they're run not as sort of state museums, but as family homes and businesses. And they survive because of the families and teams that continue to find ways to evolve them for modern life and modern audiences. One of the greatest gifts I was given growing up was being encouraged to see heritage and enterprise as intrinsically linked rather than opposing ideas. As I sort of said, every school holiday, there was some little business to set up. And I worked in cafes and restaurants and the gift shop at Beaver. My sister Alice and I ran the ice cream shop together with enormous confidence and absolutely no understanding of mathematics. I'm pleased to say that has changed and improved since. Um, but looking back, I really feel like I can trace the roots of Heritage Explore and the business that I've gone on to create to all of those early childhood experiences of growing up at Beaver. And this is Beaver for anyone that is unfamiliar with it. So as I grew older and began traveling around Britain's independent historic houses throughout 2020 in the creation of my mother's podcast called Duchess, for which I was the executive producer, um, I started to see more seriously and understand the wider picture that Beaver sort of sits within. Um, and for context for you all, so there are 1,450 independently owned historic houses, castles, and gardens across the United Kingdom. And annually, they contribute an enormous amount to the British economy, tourism, our cultural identity. And yet, so many of them are under such extraordinary financial pressure. And what struck me was this contradiction. Within the houses that you can see on the screen, and of course you can visit in the United Kingdom, to give you all more context, this is Scone Palace, where all the kings of Scotland historically have been crowned. This is Glamis, where the Queen Mother grew up, also in Scotland. This is Knowsley Hall, based just outside of Liverpool. This is Haddon Hall, based in Derbyshire, one of the oldest medieval halls in the United Kingdom. And this is Blair Athol, which is based, again, this is the sort of gatekeeper to the Highlands in Scotland. And as I mentioned, this is Belvoir. Um, but within these houses sit Van Dyck's incredible capability brand landscapes, royal archives, medieval kitchens, extraordinary family histories, and some of the most important collections in Britain. But so many, in my view, in 2020 remained actually kind of very difficult to discover, very difficult to access, and oddly absent from the modern digital world. So after making the Duchess podcast with my mother for approximately sort of 2.5 years, um, I sort of set about bringing this vision of Heritage Explore to life. I kept returning to the same question. Why was there not one platform, one place where all of these historic independent houses could be seen and accessed in an elegant place online? Um, a lot of you will be very familiar with the National Trust, I'm sure, or English Heritage. All of the houses that we work with sit outside of those two organisations because they're still independently owned. Um, and so that really was sort of seed for Heritage Explore. The mission was really simple, to help independent historic houses become easier to discover and easier to experience and easier to support them in the modern world. Lots of these houses, as I mentioned, are still run by families and quite small teams very often. And so I set up Heritage Explore really having seen firsthand at Beaver, the team. I think once upon a time at Beaver there were 102 gardeners managing the sort of capability brown landscape and the rose gardens, which were created by Harold Pito. And I can safely say there's only three, and they're all sort of part time now. But the garden size has not changed, so it gives you a sense of the enormous kind of responsibility. And I remember thinking, where's the organization? Who is the organization that's sort of sitting in parallel to these incredible places, these incredible teams, and supporting them with everything that they have going on, and also being that kind of commercial, but also outward-looking organization for them. So the mission was really simple as I saw it, to help independent historic houses become easier to discover, easier to experience, and easier to support in the modern world. And in the midst of launching Heritage Explore, life also changed enormously for me personally. This is sort of the first, I guess, article. Alex, you mentioned Bridgerton. I do really, really credit Julian Fellows, who, as a sort of hot and exciting bit of press for St. George's Society this evening, we are. I do actually have Julian Fellows coming onto our podcast soon, which is hugely exciting because he doesn't do all that many interviews. But I do credit Julian and Downton Abbey and also the Bridgerton effect, with, heralding this new fascination, particularly amongst, well, all generations actually. But I think that younger generation have been massively inspired to kind of spend more time in historic spaces as a result of Bridgerton. And that's just, that's such a wonderful kind of byproduct of it. Um, so just in the midst of launching Heritage Explore, my life also changed. And this is just to give you an idea of sort of how and what Heritage Explore is and looks like. This is our homepage, so or rather, this is our houses page. And this is where you can actually go on and kind of discover when these houses are open, what's happening behind their doors, and how you can, should you be over in the UK, sort of choose to. But on the 30th of December 2023, just after closing my funding round for the business, I met my now husband, William. Within months, we were engaged, and a year later, we were married at Belvoir in the first, and it was our first family wedding in 30 years. Um, and there is something rather extraordinary about getting married in such an amazing place, so tied deeply to, my family's history. The tiara that I'm wearing here actually dates back to the 18th century and hasn't been seen or worn in public in 33 years. So it was a huge privilege to wear it, and it felt enormously poignant. And this is just some of my ancestors. The tiara was first seen in the family in 1883 or thereabouts, and this is the seventh Duchess wearing it there. So we have that painting still actually at Belvoir. And this is my mother wearing it, my grandmother wearing it, my great grandmother wearing it, and my aunt. So it really felt like this kind of coming together. But as life would have it, I was sort of very focused on Heritage Explore, and then all of a sudden, of course, ended up meeting my now husband. Um, but yeah, what the experience sort of really enforced in me, of bringing Heritage Explore to life is that these places are by no means frozen in time. And, great directors do a fabulous job of articulating that with the shows that they create. But increasingly, I felt like the houses themselves were sort of being somewhat left behind. So, what has been fascinating since launching Heritage Explore is seeing how strongly people, particularly that younger generation, and the American audience, your good selves, are responding to our historic houses when they're presented as something that isn't dusty or humongously academic, but is something that's very, emotionally alive and also very easy to, engage with and be a part of. And really, that's how what I see our role as fundamentally is, we really aim to be that kind of conduit to our historic houses. Um, I don't know about you all, but I've certainly felt in recent times, that we all kind of crave a greater sort of meaning and continuity and real world experiences again. I think that was something that I really kind of came out of COVID feeling very viscerally. Um, and in the United Kingdom, as Alex mentioned, you can be driving along the road and see a brown sign and find yourself driving down a beautiful avenue kind of planted driveway of trees, and at the end there will be a very picturesque, beautiful historic house or castle of some shape or form. And to my mind, I really sort of wanted to, I think after COVID, I was so keen to move away from passive tourism and towards actually how do we ensure that these member houses of ours have and are, empowered to allow greater access, better storytelling, and ultimately giving people that want to go and experience them for themselves a much better belonging. I don't believe necessarily people just want to simply walk through these historic houses anymore. Of course, we all do. But I actually think they also want to better understand the lives and the history and maybe even sort of see the archival material or enjoy a beautiful candlelit dinner in these places. And that thinking ultimately led us earlier this year to creating the Heritage Explore Club as well, which is designed to feel less like a membership and more like an invitation into the world of independent historic houses. Um, but yeah, this was a recent trip actually that we had to Scone Palace, and we were looking at the most extraordinary letters and material. From Bonnie Prince Charlie, who obviously famously was trying to dethrone the Stuart King. So we really sort of attempt and aim with everything that we do with Heritage Explore. to give our members and also everyone, frankly, that sort of comes through Heritage Explore the opportunity to really dive deeper into the member houses, and we do that online as well. Much like St George's Society, we have a really live and active online book club and also online kind of program of conversations. And that they can range from me speaking with, this is Lady Anne Glenconnor. I'm sure many of you have come across her or read one of her brilliant books. Lady in Waiting is the book that really put her on the map. Um, but we really aim to sort of have this really vivid and kind of alive program of events where I have the opportunity to interview and speak with an owner of a historic house, and they'll share really honestly their appraisal of where the historic house is at today, what's happening, what the big restoration things have been. So we really try to kind of increasingly, develop the experience of historic houses across the UK. Um, Sorry, I'm just making sure I haven't lost my place. But this was a recent artist in residence program we actually hosted. So a big thing for us is also, uh, historically, historic houses always patronized contemporary artists of the day. And we again felt like actually this hadn't been reinvented or reimagined for at least a century, not collectively anyway. So we decided to reimagine what that might or could look like in 2025 and 2026, and have now got this very, very exciting program where we place contemporary artists into historic member houses for the course of a month. And in that time, they create a body of work in response to the history of that place, the setting, the stories, the art, the architecture. And shortly after they've completed the collection, there's an exhibition that's held within the castle walls. This was the artist in residence that happened at Belvoir. And you can see the kind of Gothic inspired sort of entranceway to Belvoir, hosted this enormous piece of art that just looked unbelievable. And on the left here, this is Jack Penny, who had his residency at a place called Elvedon Hall in Suffolk. So it's ideas like this that we're really trying to sort of reignite and reimagine what it means to put contemporary experiences back into historic spaces in a really sensitive, very much historically rooted kind of way. Um, and what I love most about doing things like this is that it creates a relationship between any of us, frankly, and the houses themselves. And historically, I always felt, I didn't study history personally. I'm just kind of endlessly curious and sort of always wanting to learn more. Um, and what I felt is that what we were trying to do is remove any barrier that kind of we wanted to create a sort of sense of warmth, discovery, and participation around all of our member houses, be it online or off. Excuse me. Um, So I guess what I think has been a really interesting thing for us to observe. And similarly, this is to show you an example of, we've recently just started putting together these really beautiful um, evenings at member houses, as you can all appreciate and imagine, and indeed we see across lots of historic period films and dramas. Um, very often there were jesters that lined the halls, the banqueting halls of these great historic houses, entertaining the laird or the lord or the duke of the day. And I again used that as inspiration and thought, what does what would that experience look like in 2026, and how can we reimagine that across all of our member houses? And so at the very end of last year, we ended up creating a series of what we call candlelit comedy evenings that now happen across all of our member houses. And it's quite incredible. Some of the best comedians in the world now feature at our member houses. And there's something very special about hearing hysterical laughter ringing out through these huge staterooms, as we have seen and heard in the last 3 months. And so, again, it's a really good example of us looking to sort of root everything that we do in its historical context, and crucially, ensure that as a result, it's incredibly sensitive to the place and the people that still live there. So. Um, so I think, I'd love to kind of really end the talk just by saying, I think what's always fascinated me and why I was so grateful to be asked to be a part of this talk and share more about Heritage Explore and my sort of upbringing that's very much informed so much of what I've gone on to do. Um, I think it's not least because I think what's so extraordinary is that, of course, as Alex mentioned, and I know the St. George's Society sort of is founded on the principle of, be it an Anglophile, a sort of very active Anglophile, or indeed, having British roots yourselves of some description. I think what's been so interesting is, for me, building Heritage Explorer has been seeing how, American audiences really respond so incredibly warmly to our independent historic houses and the heritage that they hold. And there is such a sort of generosity towards British history and heritage that you offer. And that relationship really, really matters for the future and sustainability of these historic places. And I think fundamentally what people are searching for is connection so often. And these houses are not, as I've hopefully gone some way to sort of describing, they're not just obviously beautiful buildings. They are repositories of memories, craftsmanship, landscape, family history, national identity, and they remind us so much of what we are a part of. Um, that one long story, and perhaps they matter more than ever at helping us kind of establish and root ourselves to today. And I love the sort of Franklin Roosevelt quote, which I think articulates so well what I believe these historic places actually mean in a wider context. A nation must believe in three things. It must believe in the past, it must believe in the future, and it must above all believe in the capacity of its own people to learn from the past that they can gain in judgment in creating their own future. And I think that sentiment captures so perfectly why I believe, preserving these historic houses, spending time in them, spending time with them. If you can't spend time in them, then spending time with them, um, not simply for Britain, but for all of us kind of collectively is such an amazing thing to do. And yeah, very glad and grateful that were able to act as one conduit amongst a good many, but one conduit to these beautiful places. And actually, Alice, who very kindly introduced me to the St. George's Society, Alice is now the head of our book club committee, with two other ladies or three other ladies. So we have a very, as I mentioned earlier, very active book club, very active kind of online program, and would welcome anyone and everyone to be a part of it with us. Because we really enjoy having the opportunity to ultimately sort of continue the story of these incredible places and draw more people into them. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Violet. That was so wonderful, and I really learned a lot.
Oh,
So I
thank you.
already have some questions coming in. The first one was just about the book club. I know that you
Yes,
just mentioned it again, and they wanted the link so I just dropped it in the chat. Do you want to
that's so
maybe
kind.
add to how often you guys meet, how the books are
Yes,
collected, just a little bit more so people understand? I think people
absolutely.
are really keen to. I want to join because I was in a
Oh,
book club that I
good.
can't meet with anymore, but yeah.
Oh, okay.
Book
Well,
club's
so
very of the moment, I think, right now.
I agree. I agree. So the book club's predominantly all online. We are going to start doing some in real life experiences at the end of at the end of our sessions. Um, so I mean, in a funny way, Alice is probably almost better placed to. She knows so much now and has learned so much. But essentially, there's four books that we choose in a year. Every single book that is selected and features in one single session. The session runs over about a quarter, so it's a nice pace. It's not sort of too time consuming alongside everyone's busy lives. But every single book that's selected is actually tied to one of our member houses. And that's the kind of, to me, that's a really important sort of consistent line and rule that I have with the book club because I'm so keen that, we learn about the historic houses not only through being in them physically, but actually some of the best and greatest writers have written unbelievable books about some of our member houses or a particular person in that member house's history. So the book that's actually been selected for this up and coming session, and we are just about to relaunch the book club. It's we haven't actually had a session as of yet this year for various reasons, but now we're really back into the swing of it again. Um, the book is actually called Secret Rooms, and it's one that I know well because it's actually based on Beaver and a particularly kind of intriguing story that unfolded with my ancestors. And funnily enough, the gentleman that you see just above my right shoulder here, that is in fact the Duke that the book, The Secret Rooms, is actually based on. Well, I mean, it's sort of based on Beaver, but also him as a slightly younger man. So yeah, so feel free to sign up to the book club. You can do so through this barcode. You should be able to as well. But it's really fun, and we've got some amazing people that are part of it from all over the world. We've got some members from Australia, some members from Ireland, of course the UK. So yeah, it's really wonderful.
Okay, wonderful. Someone asked again the book title, so that's Secret Rooms, and the author again?
The author is actually called Catherine Bailey, and so she
Catherine
was the
Bailey.
writer of Black Diamonds. Black Diamonds is a very, very, very well-known book that she wrote
Okay,
as a precursor to The Secret Rooms. But
cool.
yeah, we're excited.
Wonderful. Okay, and now Christy asks, hello, thank you for a really fascinating presentation and congratulations on your wedding. What's the most difficult part of convincing people that preservation still matters today?
I think, Christy, it's been really interesting. I feel as though COVID did a huge amount for us in the UK in a funny way and in a net positive way. I think the sort of sentiment coming out of COVID here, a lot of people, well, obviously we were all, locked down at different times. But I think a lot of people, for the first time, by virtue of being sort of stuck at home, became really aware of what was on their doorstep in a way that they perhaps hadn't, over the course of time. And that's why when I came out of COVID, I remember thinking, if I am going to set this business up, this is the time to do it because I really felt that people were far more conscious of, for example, in the UK, when the first lockdown opened up, it was independent historic houses that were the first to open their gates, free of charge, of course, to everyone and anyone in the local area to come and enjoy the gardens, come and enjoy the landscapes, because of course everyone was so devoid of big open spaces. And so I think these historic houses kind of played a really seminal role again in people's lives throughout COVID, much like they did in the world in interestingly World War One and Two. All of our member houses, with the exception of the Scottish historic houses, interestingly, because Scotland, as I'm sure lots of you know, in World War One and Two, whilst they may have travelled south and got involved in the war, very often, they weren't bombed by any means in the same way that the south of England was. But they all played such a crucial role in World War One and Two, becoming hospitals, becoming schools, becoming Beaver actually during the war housed all of the national items of interest from the Houses of Parliament. And so they played such an important role in the last sort of century's, all-consuming crisis. And I think they played a really important role again in COVID. And I do think there's a sort of net positive hangover that came from that of people actually thinking, wow, I had no idea this place was on my doorstep, and I had no idea that I can be a part of this and engage with it and get things from it that then actually have inspired this sense of preservation. Um, but there's no doubt there's a huge challenge. There's £1 billion worth of backlog in restoration work at our member houses right now. So those 1,450 houses have exactly, or just actually now over 1 billion in restoration work that needs to happen across all of them. And whilst of course there are government grants that exist, they're never kind of significant enough to warrant the extent to which some houses have to go to restore, be it a tapestry or a painting in its fullest. So we have a huge amount of work to do to really kind of ensure that, we act as one, as I mentioned earlier, every house ultimately kind of does its own line share of work. But I really see Heritage Explores work. We're not a charity, I should say, but we are very much, that kind of that conduit to these houses, and I think I see that work as incredibly important to inspire that younger generation in particular who perhaps don't know as much about preservation, but really get them excited by the concept of it and engage with these places. In the hope that, one day when they can potentially contribute more, they might choose to.
Definitely. Yeah, I was gonna, I mean, you had t touched on it a bit in your presentation, but I was so curious about that. I mean, a running joke with my husband and I is when we watch these types of shows is like, can you imagine the heating bill for those types of castles when we watch like Game of Thrones or something? Like, do you imagine how cold it is? But yeah, I was just curious. I know you mentioned with the gardening, like how much is, if it is at all subsidized by the government because there is, I'm sure, interest to preserve these spaces because it brings in so much tourism. So I was just curious as to how that works because they don't want these castles to fall into disrepair because that brings in so much money
It
to the,
does.
yeah.
It definitely does. But equally, these places are independently owned. And so, I think the government over here feels there's no sort of financial grants that are kind of consistently given to any of our member houses. The National Trust definitely does get, I think they received 25 million last year in grants. And they look after 250 houses. So there's a huge amount that they look after and do. But no, these houses are kind of left to fend for themselves.
Yeah.
And I think that's why I felt so strongly that, I feel like the sort of the public sector of heritage is really well catered for with the National Trust as an organization. I just felt that the independent sector, there was less knowledge about these amazing places and the fact that they were independently owned and what that really means and translates to, as it relates to you or I, Alex, and and why, and fundamentally, I often can be heard saying, working with these amazing independent houses is like working with, sort of 1,000. We were not quite working with 1,000 of them yet. We're working with about 70 of the independent houses right now. And by the end of the year, we probably will be working with 100 of them. But it's often, I often say it's like working with 100 independent small businesses. The only difference being that they have, almost 1,000 years of history each to sort of
Yeah.
bring with them into the future. So it's of course like it's kind of partially a joke because it's you can't really be a small startup business or a startup when you've got 1,000 years of history behind you. But
Yeah.
you kind of have to be. There's this constant tension of preservation and innovation that exists in heritage today. And as I mentioned, that's what excites me so much, and is equally, it's an opportunity and a huge challenge to address with all of these amazing places.
Yeah, we saw Anna Castle and my brother-in-law had to remind me like there's somebody that lives there, so just be careful where you take that picture. And that's I don't know if people are familiar with that one, but the exteriors were used for Harry Potter and Downton Abbey and stuff like that. So it's just yeah, really interesting. We have two more questions here, and you guys can continue to drop these in the chat. I know we have Violet till 1 our time, but the second one is wonderful insights. Oh, her name is, I'm not sure if this is a man or a woman. I apologize. Zeta. Wonderful insights. Thank you. I am a legacy curator and would love to hear how your and your husband's family legacies are now present in both of your lives.
I love that question, Zita. So thank you. So interestingly, I didn't mention in the presentation, but interestingly, this is not actually the first time that my husband and I's families have married into one another. Please fear not. We're not sort of first, second, third, fourth, or fifth cousins or anything like that. But William's family herald from a Scottish clan called Lindsay's. So his family have been in this part of Scotland for just over 1,000 years. And back in 1855, would you believe it, my great grandmother, who I was also named after, Violet, in 1855, sorry, went from being Violet Lindsay to Violet Manners and then Violet Rutland. She became the eighth Duchess of Rutland. And as my father said at his during his speech at our wedding, in 2025, I went from being Violet Manners to Violet, soon to be Lindsay. I will one day be called the Countess of Lindsay. So it was this kind of surreal moment. So I think, in answer to your question, Tita, it feels like ever since I've met William, that actually, both his family history and mine have kind of been very present, just because of this extraordinary link to our kind of collective past. And I think for me, I think that kind of consciousness about yeah, that kind of consciousness and awareness and interest that I have towards William's family history, and indeed, my own, is so wonderful, because I think the more you know, the more you're empowered to kind of, incorporate as best we can, the odd story or the odd thing into our day-to-day lives. I hope that kind of answers the question.
Yeah, wow, so interesting. And so
Yeah.
cool that you like have all this knowledge. I had shared before we had opened this up that all of my family heritage I just learned from ancestry.com, but I would love
Yeah.
to learn more about all these people that I'm just seeing these names of from the 1800s and things like that.
Yeah.
We have another question coming from Mike. He asks, do you schedule other types of performances and or historical presentations at any of these spaces, including, of course, your own?
We do. So I mentioned the candlelit comedy that we host, and was inspired by, the jesters of their day. I mentioned briefly sort of mentioned we now host these really beautiful supper clubs.
Oh,
And they
wow.
tend to
Sounds
be,
fun.
yeah, they tend to be sort of black tie, and or sort of cocktail dress. And they tend to be in the old sort of staterooms of that particular house. And again, this is something that we've really recently launched, for our club members. And of course, we try to give as much advance warning as to when it's happening, so that if you are, planning ahead for the year ahead, and thinking about when you may or may not be traveling across to the UK, I hope that there's something there for you to kind of become aware of and engage with. The membership to Heritage Explore is kind of intentionally priced at £20, which forgive me, I should know what that is in dollars. But it's intentionally kind of priced to be hopefully really accessible for as many people as possible, because I really want everyone to feel like they can kind of be in the know as to what's happening where at Heritage, essentially. But yes, there are lots of different historical presentations. We have lots of online talks, as I mentioned, Mike, as well. So, we've got a talk actually coming up with Stephen Moore, who is kind of one of the great antique specialists over here in the UK. And him and I will be discussing on Monday, actually, next week. We'll be talking all about the famous sort of grand tours that took place, and, led a great many of the historic house owners of their days and the aristocrats over to Europe to go and buy up a huge amount of art, and a huge amount of sort of sculpture. So we'll be learning more about that through Stephen on Monday. And I'll be hosting that conversation. So yes, we really try to sort of keep a very alive program of online things happening for our club members, essentially.
That's so great. And I apologize that I forgot, but with for those of you that have joined us for the other virtual fireside chats, we did have Adrian Tinniswood last year. Are you familiar with him? He's a writer and he's a
Yeah,
historian. Yeah, so we had him. So now I'm feeling like we need to have you guys have a conversation and maybe we'll do a
yeah,
fireside chat with the two of you or something.
that'd be
Um,
great. I'd love that.
yeah.
That'd be really great.
Yeah, he's so sweet. Okay, and then we have one from Leslie. She said she apologized. She missed the first half, but she wants to know what area of Scotland you're in again.
So
Yeah.
we are based in Fife, and Lindsay is a sort of, one of many clan and also sort of type. It's the name of my husband's family. So they're the his parents, the Earl and Countess of Lindsay. So, but Lindsay's also a clan as well. Not a ta not a town. Um, yeah.
Cool. And then she also just wants to know, this is more of like a logistics operations question again. She said she signed up for the emails, but oh, okay. I'm not sure if this is a St. George's question, but I guess if people want to learn more about anything related to Heritage Explorer, they can just sign up using that QR code or going to your website. Is that right? I'm going to put that in the chat as
Yes.
well.
So you should be able to sign up to get notices about any of sort of our events. Essentially, if you become a club member, then you'll automatically essentially be kept informed. There's a sort of email that goes out every month,
Okay.
and that informs everyone about not only it's not just about sort of events and online events or physical events. As I mentioned, it's also, we get lots of historic house owners actually writing articles for us in the club about a particular piece of art that they're restoring and why it's important to restore it, or so there's a huge cross section in the club on offer, which is our goal. We really want it to be sort of all encompassing for everyone, whether you're at home here in the UK or indeed abroad.
Yeah, wonderful. Okay, well, if anyone else has any more questions, but otherwise, I don't know. Violet, do you want to close on anything else? I know that we're a little bit early, but I don't have any more
Yeah,
questions here from attendees, but this was
amazing.
absolutely great. And
Oh,
thank you
thank you.
everyone for joining. Yeah. Violet,
Yeah.
any closing remarks or anything?
Well, just to you, Alex, thank you so much for making it all happen and organising it all. And thank you to Alice as well, who, as I
Yes.
mentioned, now heads up our book club. And Alice will be, a familiar face to perhaps some of you. But our book club starts in earnest, so would welcome any of you to join. And thank you just so much for having us. And what an amazing, I've really enjoyed learning about your society and the work that you do as well. So congratulations on all of that. And I hope when I'm in New York, I can attend one of the social gatherings in the future.
Yes, yes, we'd love to have you.
That would
We
be
are, we
great.
had someone say, great idea to have Adrian and Violet do a fireside chat. So
Oh,
we already have
great.
one person interested.
Love
Okay,
that.
well, wonderful. Thank you again so
Thank
much.
you so
Have a
much.
great night over where you guys are. Have a however where you are, Violet, and have a great
Yes.
afternoon for our attendees. And thanks so much again.
Perfect. Thank you for having me. Take
Bye.
care.
Thanks. Bye-bye.